Okay, Chairman, we are live on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Constitution Ethics Committee. I'd like to begin by welcoming any members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I'd ask all members of the committee to keep their video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted except when I invite them to speak. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function in the participants' screen. This is the blue hand. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there's always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I'll begin by asking the Democratic Services Officer to do a roll call of members on the committee, and if members can confirm their attendance, I'd be grateful. Dan?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, if you could just confirm your attendance. Councillor Allen?
In attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Bashir?
In attendance.
Councillor Iqbal?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy?
Good evening and present.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Shahid?
Here.
Thank you. And yourself, Chairman, Councillor Seaton.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So the next point is, does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? If so, can they please raise their hand now?
Thank you, Chairman. I see Councillor Murphy raised his hand.
Councillor Murphy.
Just on declaration of interest on item 12, Code of Conduct complaints, I'm a correspondent concerning the assault of 12 months ago and the complaint against the leader.
I'm not sure I understand the assault of 12 months ago. Do you mean an alleged assault of 12 months ago, Councillor Murphy?
Members, can I just interrupt here to remind you that the Code of Conduct complaints report is to be treated in an anonymous way without any details being given at the committee.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Any other disclosures? Okay, moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting, which was a long time ago now, 30th September 2019. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting held on that date as correct record. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder, please?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. I think it's Councillor Allen and Councillor Bashir to second. Okay. Item 4, chairmanship of scrutiny committees. Can I ask Paulina Ford to introduce this item, and then I'll call on Councillor Sanford to say a few words. Paulina.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, my unmute button decided not to work at the last minute. Thank you, Chairman. So this report has been brought to the committee at the request of Councillor Sanford with regard to the chairmanship of the scrutiny committees. In that he's raised some concerns that the style of chairing of some of the scrutiny committees perhaps do not follow the guidelines for the Centre for Public Governance and Scrutiny. So I was tasked with speaking to the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny to check what their general guidance was for chairing of scrutiny committees. And as I've mentioned in the report, they've said that there's no specific guidance to chairing scrutiny committees, and each chairman will adopt their own style. And the best chairs are flexible, changing their approach depending on the meeting and the subject matter. I also, in the report, have mentioned that chairmen do get offered and actually do undertake training at the beginning of each municipal year, which is provided by the Democratic Services team. However, Councillor Sanford requested that we look into other training, and as listed in the report, the Centre for Public Scrutiny can offer training. There is obviously a cost to this training, but that can be offered if required. So if Councillor Sanford would like to mention anything further to the report. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Pauline. I think this is, to some extent, it's all a bit in the past now, because this related to some committee meetings that I attended sometime during 2019. And what was happening at those committees was that people were basically being asked to ask their questions in turn and only being allowed to ask one question. And there was some frustration at the meeting that I attended, that people, wanted to ask a line of questioning in order to clarify something or obtain some information, and they weren't able to do that because they'd got to wait for their turn to come around again. And if there's like 12 people on the committee, that could be about 20 minutes by the time that happens. Now, so I think really I was in two minds really as to whether to withdraw this, but I do think it does put forward, leaving aside the personalities involved, because I don't even know if that person is still the chair of a committee. I think as a general principle, when I've been on training for how to do effective scrutiny, what you get told is to ask a series of questions. They recommend that you start with like open questions to get some information, and then you gradually hone in on a particular piece of information. Now, so I think in order to have effective scrutiny, we should allow, and I think, to be honest, most committee chairs do this. If people want to ask 2 or 3 questions, to get to drill down on a particular aspect of a report or something, that they should be allowed to do that. Obviously, the chair would need to exert some degree of control, and if somebody started asking like 8 questions and taking half an hour, that would be ridiculous. So I think that you do need to apply this in a reasonable way. So I think what I would ask really, I think training is important. I think in the year I was a chair of a committee, I think I was offered some training, but it was at a time that I couldn't attend, and then there was no further opportunity. So I think the role of chair on a committee is it's quite a difficult role. I wouldn't say it's an easy thing, but it's quite an important role, because because having an effective chairman means you can have an effective meeting, and if it's a scrutiny committee, it can then be effective in the role it's trying to fulfill. So I think the 2 points I would ask for really, could we maybe have a look at the training that is provided for committee chairs, and try and incorporate that idea that people shouldn't just be able to ask a single question, but if they need to ask a series of questions, that should be facilitated.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I have considerable sympathy for that. Councillor Murphy, you wanted to make a point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It goes back a few minutes. When you called for the minutes to be approved, Unfortunately, neither of those who proposed to second them were actually at the meeting.
You don't need to be at a meeting to be able to approve the minutes subsequently, Councillor Murphy. I'm afraid that sounds strange, but that's the case, I'm afraid.
It's astonishing to hear that. It's good practice that you have to be in attendance to approve and second. It's the first time I've ever heard that ever at Peterborough City Council.
Well, otherwise minutes that took place before a change of council.
Chair, if I may finish, it's always been the case that people who are present really should propose and second, because it's a record of what happened at the meeting. Therefore, you have to be at the meeting to agree with that record or not.
Happy to withdraw my my proposal.
Well, thank you, Councillor Murphy. Your point is appreciated. However, I think the point that every May we have elections, and therefore the people approving minutes after the elections may not be the people before the election is probably one reason why we have that rule. However, I do have Councillor Allen and Councillor Bashir withdrawing as seconder and proposer. So do I have yourself, Councillor Murphy, happy to propose them? Well, I then have, if you're not happy, I have Councillor Shahid and Councillor Iqbal.
I'm happy to present, Councillor Seaton.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you, Councillor Shahid.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. That's appreciated. Thank you. I mean, I think as a point of principle, it's not a bad one, Councillor Murphy. So thank you for raising it. Okay, back to the chairmanship of scrutiny committees. Councillor Murphy, you still have your hand raised?
Sorry, Chair, that's what we call a legacy hand. I'm trying to take it down.
I can't see any more hands raised.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Okay. I just have one point, Councillor Sanford. I think it's a point well made about training, but I think, Paulina, what I would like to do as well is just write to all scrutiny chairs, let them know that the point has been raised about allowing the a line of questioning to continue if it's important, and just highlight that to them as something that this committee has discussed, if that's okay.
Yes, I will do. Thank you.
And if members are happy, thank you. So the recommendations are to note the contents of the report and that council should consider making chairing skills training mandatory for scrutiny committee chairs. And then I will also, as chair of this committee, write to those scrutiny committee chairs and just make that particular point.
Yep.
Do I have any dissenting voices?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That I think it is an idea that basically deals with the concerns I was putting forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I think it is an important issue, so it's appreciated. Okay, I'm going to move on to item 5, members' gifts and hospitality policy. And I don't know, is it Amy or Fiona who's going to introduce this?
Amy's going to, Chairman.
Welcome, Amy. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the policy that we've put together builds on the existing version and has been developed as part of the Monitoring Officer's general and ongoing review of good governance. Some of the changes that you'll see are purely cosmetic to sort of aid the flow of the document. But substantive changes include the introduction of a law and governance section, which confirms that while there's no obligation for members to register gifts and hospitality, they are bound by the requirements of the Bribery Act and the Code of Conduct, which in very broad terms prevents members from accepting gifts and hospitality as an inducement or a reward in circumstances where it could unduly influence their performance of official duties. There's also the inclusion of some general principles, which are designed to assist members in determining whether or not their acceptance of gifts or hospitality is appropriate in any given situation. And the core message there is that there must be some commensurate value to the council rather than being of purely individual benefit, and obviously shouldn't be accepted in circumstances where it could be misconceived or again viewed as an incentive. There's also the inclusion now of a consistent value for gifts and hospitality, which reflects the recommendation of the Commission on Standards in Public Life as part of their review. And now gifts and hospitality, up to an individual value of £50 or a collective value of £100 in 1 year may be accepted, provided they are consistent with the general principles. And then there's obviously the inclusion of some specific sections in relation to wills, sponsorships, gifts to the council and gifts to the chairman or woman, and obviously the recommendation there to discuss any matters of that nature with the monitoring officer so that the proper governance or legal protocols can be followed. And then finally, there's more detailed information about how to register a gift or hospitality, and a reminder that this may also trigger the need for a related interest to be declared at a future meeting if that interest is engaged. So the request this evening is for members to approve the changes to the policy if they are agreeable, and obviously happy with Fiona to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So do I have any questions? Would you please raise your hand? Councillor Murphy, you raised your hand briefly there.
Yeah, it's supposed to be still up, Chair. Thank you. If I may.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you for the report. I've been through it and it's very well written. And I do like on page 20, the attempt to be inclusive, talking about chairmen and chairwomen. Obviously, there are people that don't identify with gender, so maybe that could be made even better. I'm just wondering how this got on the agenda, and but what we have on the agenda, I'm happy to recommend that we approve.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Who would like to answer that question, how it got on the agenda?
I will, Chairman, if you don't mind. Well, there was internal audit did look at this area, but you know this report was ready for the March meeting, so it would have been last year sometime, and the recommendation was that policy was reviewed, and so that's what we've done.
Thank you. I've got no further hands. So members, the recommendations are to review and approve the proposed changes to the members' gifts and hospitality policy. Members, if you don't agree to the recommendations, can you please raise your virtual hand and we'll move to a vote. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether chair would be gender neutral, and that might be better than chairman, chairwoman. I don't know what other colleagues think.
Fiona, does that make any great difference if we change it to chair?
It's a matter for you. Some members don't like the word chair for other reasons as well. I've heard people say, well, it can be, you know, chair is obviously an inanimate object as well, and they don't like. I've heard members raise that in the chamber when they're referred to as chair. However, I'm completely ambivalent on it. If that's what members wish to do, I'm happy to change it to chair.
I support Councillor Murphy's point, and I think it's in general practice, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Allen, if you would raise a hand if you wish to speak. I didn't quite catch the point you were making there. Councillor Allen?
Thank you, Chair. And I would support Councillor Murphy's proposal to use the term chair, because I think it's in general use anyway, and it saves the problem for using either or. So I would support Councillor Murphy's proposal. I'm
sure inanimate object would be appropriate for certain councillors. So I don't have a particular issue with that. So I had no one against the basic recommendations. Is anyone against the use of chair?
I can't see anyone.
I've got no one against the use of chair. So thank you. We'll accept that. Thank you, Councillor Murphy, for that proposal. So item 6, update and review of standing orders. Can I ask Pippa Turvey to introduce the item? Thank you, Pippa.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. Yes, so we've got the report before you today in relation to updating some of the council's standing orders in the petition scheme. There's 4 areas which the committee needs to consider this evening, and I'll just run through those quickly. So the first matter is changing the standing orders in relation to the approval of minutes. So this relates to submitting any changes that members would like to make to minutes on the accuracy of minutes to the Democratic Services officers by 12 noon the day before of the meeting. And this is purely a practical change to allow for officers to investigate the requested changes prior to the meeting. If we are presented with changes at the meeting, we can't accurately advise on whether they are accurate or not. So this just gives us a chance to give you a bit more information on any requested changes before the meeting. The second issue is a change to the review of submission timelines for motions to full council. So members will recall we did change the dates for submissions of motions to full council about over a year ago now, and we were going to review them. So this is a chance for members to review those dates and suggest any changes. In the report, we've put two options, and that is to retain the current deadline motions, which is currently 9 clear working days before the meeting for draft motions and 7 clear working days for the final version of those motions. Or a second option to push those deadlines back 1 day each, so it would be 8 clear working days for draft motions and 6 clear working days for final motions. The third option, the third issue I'd like committee to consider this evening is in relation to the standing orders and the mayor or chair's casting vote. This is just to provide some clarity, because in the past there have been a few queries around how this is applied. So we have suggested the addition of the words "not including any formal abstentions" within that. So that's just to make clear that abstentions do not count when we are considering equalities of votes. And that's just to clarify that section. And then finally for committee this evening is a proposed change to the petition scheme. And this is simply to add a further category into the list of petitions that wouldn't be considered or wouldn't be accepted. And that is a petition related to any decision by the council that has already been taken. And that is just to ensure that council does not accept any petition that it could not actually make any decision on, which would be not a good use of council's time. So those are the four issues. Happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you, Pippa. I think just one point in the recommendations, it talks about the petition scheme as set out in paragraph 4.12, and I think it's 4.13 we're talking about, but I'm sure colleagues have picked that up. I'm intending to take these in order of recommendation for discussion. So approval of minutes is paragraph 4.16. Is there anyone who wishes to speak about approval of minutes? Councillor Murphy.
Yes, Chair. Thank you for deciding to take them in order and citing which ones they are. So on 4.16, I'm not sure it's actually needed, but I think it is only polite to give a heads up to the Secretariat if you want to challenge the accuracy of a minute. For those councillors that have read the agendas before the council meeting, they can do that. but sometimes people raise things that may be an omission or for a historic reason. I just think if we can be a bit more disciplined and let the mayor tell us not to raise things that aren't actually accuracy or admissions, then we don't need this. The current constitution is fine on it. So intentions are good, but it's not needed. But I would ask that we do support members being polite and giving the officers a heads up if they are going to challenge the accuracy rather than whether there's been an omission.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murphy. Point taken. Are there any other speakers on this particular issue? Okay, my intention is to vote on these one at a time as well. So the recommendation is that members must notify the monitoring officer of democratic services by no later than 12 p.m. on the day of the meeting if they believe there's been a substantive omission or factually incorrect information recorded in the minutes. Can you put your hand up if you disagree with that recommendation?
I can see Councillor Murphy, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murphy. Yep. Can I have a hand up from all those who agree with the recommendation?
Chair, would it be useful for me just to do a quick roll call of those members?
Well, I have three, and I have myself, Councillor, sorry, Dan.
Okay.
Councillor Kelly. Sounds good. Sounds good. So I shall take that as a recommendation approved. Thank you. So the second is 4.12, which is the mayor chairs casting vote. I think this is an approach we have taken in council, but this is just to correct it in the constitution. Is that correct, Pippa?
Yeah, that's right. It's a inclusion into the constitution, what we do in practice already.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Shahid wishes to speak.
I don't believe I put my hand up, sorry. If I did, I apologise.
Is that a legacy? It's a legacy hand, is it?
Yeah, for the vote one, sorry.
That's okay. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, mine was up because I do want to talk on it. I think I am slightly concerned that we do appear to be requiring people to put in motions and draft motions so far in advance of the meeting that in some circumstances they could lose some of their
Councillor Sanford, I'm taking these in order. So it's 4.12, which is the mayor's or chairs casting vote.
Sorry, yeah. All right, okay, right. I will go on to that then. I think on that one, I don't disagree with the proposal. I don't think it's necessary because I think I would always interpret if somebody abstains that they are abstaining from the vote, that they should not be counted. But I believe there is some difference of opinion on that. So I think putting those words in would probably help to clarify it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanford. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, and on the same subject, Chair, there is a perception sometimes that an abstention is a sort of de facto vote against. So just to clarify, any abstentions will be taken off the total and then the majority of those remaining will be the vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable assumption. Thank you. Councillor Murphy?
Yes, I think people are belt and braces on this one. An equal number of votes is quite clear. It's the same number of votes each way. If you abstain, you haven't voted. So we don't actually need to change the constitution. We just need to interpret it with common sense. An equal number of votes is an equal number of votes. I was not going to support this recommendation though, as we've already decided to change the constitution, as I believe unnecessary anyway, and there's going to be alterations, it's neither here nor there.
I'd take that point, Councillor Murphy. Regrettably, sometimes things can get a bit pedantic, and having it in black and white is necessary. Okay, I have no other speakers. So on this particular recommendation, 4.12, the Mayor chairs casting vote. If there are equal numbers of votes for and against, not including any formal abstentions, the Mayor Chair will have a second or casting vote. There will be no restriction on how the Mayor Chair chooses to exercise a casting vote. Can I have all those against?
None, Chair.
And Daniel, do you want to keep an eye for me on all those? Councillor Murphy, you're voting against?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
All those in favour?
I don't think it'll be a tied vote, Chair, so no need to worry.
I think you might be right, Councillor Murphy, yes. All those in favour of this recommendation? Right, and myself, Daniel, that's 5-1.
Could I just raise a point of order, Mr. Chairman, just on the point, because on the grounds of transparency, if we're taking the vote using the electronic hands, if a member of the public was looking at the meeting, could they actually see that? Because if they can't, then I think we should be taking the vote in a more public way. So.
That is an excellent point, Councillor Sanford. And I must admit, I had not thought of that, I suppose, because I fully see the screen. My apologies to anyone watching if I have not addressed that point properly. If we may, we will do that in subsequent votes, Dan. I think you did try to make that point to me, Dan, and I ignored it. So my apologies to you as well. Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanford. So 4.13 is the petitions scheme, and Councillor Sanford, you did want to speak on this.
Sorry, I'm getting confused now. Are we talking about the petitions, or are we talking about the sort of how far in advance to submit motions? Or?
Sorry, my mistake. 4.13. 4.13, the petitions scheme.
Okay.
And this is basically related to a decision by the council that has already been taken. So if a decision has already been taken by the council, we do not allow a petition to go forward. That's what this specific item is.
Right, I would like to talk on that then, if I can. Thank you. Okay. Yes, I think I'm much opposed to what is proposed, and if I could just explain why. I think on the face of it, it sounds like a good thing. You know, the council has a decision-making process; it makes a decision, and then we're saying that we're not going to allow people to submit a petition objecting to that decision. The problem with that process is that the council can always alter a decision, and the classic example of this I would like to quote is the controversy over the Rhubarb Bridge, because if you recall what happened there, the council through its local transport plan and actually made a decision that they wanted to remove the bridge and replace it with pedestrian crossings. That process was going through, and it only became a matter of public concern when the council published a decision to actually issue the contracts for that work to happen. There was then a petition that was submitted, I think about 5,000 signatures on, and as a result of the petition, the council decided to reconsider it and then eventually actually overturn that decision and has now decided that the bridge ought to be retained. So I think I would just quote that as an example of a situation where somebody might want to submit a petition about a decision that ostensibly has already been taken. And I think the problem is, if you put this into the Constitution, you know, people don't always hear about council decisions happening. You know, sometimes they are decisions that can be changed. If it relates to a planning decision, then quite often, you know, there are legal reasons why that can't actually be changed without somebody going to court. So I think it does depend on what the decision actually is, but I don't think we should put a prohibition in the Constitution about people submitting petitions in these circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I'll see how good the power of super glue is on these glasses. Councillor Murphy, you wish to speak?
Yes, I think people do understand what petitions are. In this country, it's normal practice for you to be able to petition the Queen, the council. You can petition anybody to do something. For this council to introduce a rule whereby you can't petition if the council have already made a decision on it, means you can't petition the council to review. Things may have changed, something may not be taken into consideration, or the public in general may want the council to review or reconsider. So, good point about not wanting people to petition on something the council has no influence over. Well, it does have influence over it. It can review and it can change. And we have quite a good system at Peterborough City Council, depending upon the number of people that petition. It goes back to the committee or the chair, and they reconsider or review and decide to do nothing or do something or whatever. And if an awful lot of people petition, then the whole council may have a look at it. So I think what we've got is working fine, and it's only right and proper that people ask the council to review, and it can be on anything. Obviously, there are some quasi-legal things where the council can't change its mind, perhaps sometimes on planning, but I think people should be allowed to petition the council about anything really that is appropriate and that they feel concerned about. And the Rhubarb Bridge is quite a good example. There's many that have gone on in the past, whether it's a football club, whether it's solar panels, whether it's a parking restriction in a street, because the council's decided that it's going to do this. Well, I think the people in the street should be able to say, no, we'd like the zebra crossing somewhere else, or we'd like the parking restricted on the other side of the street, etc., etc. I think members can understand that I'm saying the flexibility we've got at the moment is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I must admit my recollection of the events of Rhubarb Bridge and the timeline is not quite as set out. I do remember a scrutiny chair once agreeing that we should remove Rhubarb Bridge though. Councillor Allen, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I do take the points about democracy and the ability of residents and taxpayers to challenge council decisions. But I think if we can put a time scale in here, it may just clarify things, because if a decision's been taken that then incurs costs and you are so far down the line that it would be impractical or financially incorrect to change back on the course, then I think that would sort this little motion, this change to the item out. So a timescale is what I would encourage, and how we arrive at a timescale, that's open for debate.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I mean, I think the original issue was a councillor bringing forward a proposal to put some sort of ban on fireworks that was not within the ability of the council to deliver. That was the original problem. And I think Councillor Murphy touched on another issue, which is planning, where a planning decision has been made. Clearly, there could be difficulties with council overturning that. I'd just like to turn to Fiona Macmillan, if I may, Fiona. I think in some ways it's accepted that there may be decisions that have already been taken that it would be very difficult to overturn, or if there is an inability of the council to actually deliver that particular request, it's almost around the wording of what's been put in here that the concern is.
Yes, Chairman, I've heard what's been said, and really the intention behind this was to cover those decisions where there was no possibility of the council reviewing or reconsidering it. So actually not quite the Rhubarb Bridge example. So I'm wondering whether if we added the words related to a decision by the council that has already been taken, and it needs to be B, and there's a typo there rather than B, where there is no possibility of review or reconsideration by the council.
Where there is no mechanism for review or reconsideration by the council?
Yes, which is quite a small, narrow
Would that be
group of decisions, but it would...
Okay. I've got Councillor Sanford wants to come in, and then Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I do think that it's a theme that's running through this agenda. I think that, you know, we're putting things in the Constitution that there is actually no need for them. And I think, you know, we've gone along with a couple of them, but I think, you know, this is going a stage too far, I think, because what we need to bear in mind is that when the council gets a petition, they're not under any obligation to take any actual action. And I think, you know, to try and say that, you know, that you can't submit something, you can't submit a petition on a decision that's been taken and where there is no possibility of the council changing its decision. Well, I would actually argue there are very few situations where that applies, because, you know, there is, even in the case of a planning application, I can think it's quite a long time ago it happened, but we did have a case a number of years ago, you know, where a grant of planning permission was actually overturned. And you know, we actually have a planning review committee that does have certain limited powers to actually overturn grants of planning permission. So I think, you know, why do we want to put this in the Constitution, which basically says to members of the public, you are legally prohibited from sending petitions in? You know, why not just let people send petitions in, and then it's entirely up to the council then to decide, you know, how that petition should be taken forward. And I think, as Councillor Murphy was explaining, you know, we've already got a tiered system where if it's got a certain number of signatures on it, goes to, you know, it goes to particular groups. And so I think I don't really see what the need for this is.
Well, I think it was to avoid something coming to council where the council has no powers to make it happen. That was the point. Councillor Murphy, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I pick up on the point you raised earlier on, Chair, you mentioned fireworks. I'm not sure about petitions, but similar. I put forward a motion on fireworks and it went in early, and the officers had a really good look at it, trading standards and others, and they helped me write the motion so it dealt with what the council had powers over, i.e. the council doesn't make the law, which is the point you're saying. So the motion was about use at community centres and asking the government to reconsider the law so things can be brought up to speed. On the petitions, I think Councillor Allen makes a good point. You know, do we really want a petition coming in on building a school 2 years after we've decided to build the school? No, we don't. And I don't think that will happen. But on the very rare occasion it might maybe do so. As a council, we're not into building roads to nowhere because of petitions and things being overturned. And people can petition the council, and the council can say, thank you very much for your comments on this and that, whether it's be fireworks, but this is all we can do legally, therefore we can't take it any further. And indeed, Cabinet do that regularly when petitions get referred to them. So I don't think by simply put in a few words into the proposals this evening. I think they were possibilities and mechanisms that the council has. Those sort of words would possibly lead to argument about what the possibilities are of the council changing his mind and what the mechanisms are. So I think, though Councillor Allen has a good point, that could be taken up elsewhere and come back if need be. But I think tonight we probably don't want to go to the step of agreeing this recommendation that petitions can't be related to a decision by the council that has already been taken. That would be going too far, and we don't need it. There's been no problems.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think this probably relates to a planning decision at this stage. Over my time on the council, I cannot remember an issue like this arising very often at all, and that's some 12 years. I'm hearing a mix of views here. Councillor Sanford, you wanted to come in again?
No, sorry,
you've got your hand.
No, I've actually, yeah, I've left my hand up by mistake. I will take it there.
The legacy hand. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we do need to move to a vote on this. Daniel, do you want to just lead on that? I just need a little bit of time to think.
That's fine, Judge. Are we voting, just to make sure we're voting on the recommendation that's set out in the paper, or the revised one with the wording from Fiona? Or are we voting on to not have the recommendation as it is at the moment and offers to go back?
That
Seems to be
is
clear on what we're
a
going to
very
vote for.
good point. Thank you for that. Yes, I was just, sorry, musing on my own view in light of the debate we've just had, that it's perhaps changed my mind slightly. I think at this stage, I'll withdraw my proposed wording and just have a vote specifically on 4.14, because I think that crystallizes it. Do people think at this stage we need to amend the wording of the petition scheme in this way? If we do find it an issue, we can come back to it. But if we vote just on the recommendation in 4.14.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So members, just to clarify, we're voting on the recommendation that's set out as Councillor Seaton outlined. So I'll go to Councillor Allen. Are you in favour or against or abstaining?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Bashir? You're on mute, Councillor Bashir. Still on mute, Councillor Bashir. Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to you, Councillor Bashir, but you're still on mute. Councillor Iqbal.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I'm against this at this stage. I'm just wondering what we have in the Constitution if people can't vote because they're on mute, whether they're counted as a vote against or not.
Very good point.
Councillor Sanford.
I'm against it.
Thank you. Councillor Shahid.
Yeah, against as well, please, Dan. Thank you.
Councillor Bashir, are you able to unmute? Chairman, if you're happy, can I ask Councillor Bashir to type which way she wishes to vote in the chat, and I can then read it out on her behalf.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think the response to Councillor Murphy is it's a technical issue that obviously we adjourn the meeting and I think on balance, I'm against this, having heard the points from that have been made. I think it is something we should keep under review, Fiona, and see if it becomes an issue in the future.
Just for clarification, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Just for clarification, Chairman, the vote at the end, Councillor Bashir has voted against, and therefore it's 6 against and 1 abstention. Therefore, the recommendation has not been agreed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good debate. So, moving back to the timeline of submission of motions to full council. So this is item 4. This is 4.7 onwards. Councillor Shahid, do you wish to speak?
Apologies, the legacy hand, I think.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanford?
Yes, the genuine one. I've actually realised the problem I've been having, because there's actually a difference in the order that the items are in the recommendations at the beginning of the report, and I was taking them from the main part of the report. So, but anyway, we're now on to this one. So, yeah, I think just returning to the point I was making earlier, I think it is actually causing issues, certainly in our group, where we have to submit motions effectively now 14 days in advance of the council meeting, and I think I can appreciate that having the motion submitted in draft form, so that officers can have a look at the wording before they actually get the final form, and so they can refer it to council departments. That's a good thing, and I think the evidence is that's working, but I don't actually see why they need such a long period of time. So I think I would support the recommendation B that is in the report, that we should at least try going to having motions submitted 8 clear working days in draft form and 6 clear working days as a final motion, because I think that will, give officers adequate time, but it will also mean that councillors aren't under such pressure to get motions in, because one of the things, I don't know how other groups operate, but we have a process before a motion is submitted that the councillor needs to get the group to actually agree the motion that has been put forward. So all of those processes need to happen, so I would favour making the change.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Do I have any other speakers? No other speakers. I've always been in favour of giving officers as long as possible to ensure that motions meet any legal requirements. And I'm fully aware that at the current time, there is a lot of pressure on officers, let alone having to deal with things late in the day. So what I'm going to do on this is move to a, does it allow me to vote? 2 options are proposed to the committee. Okay. So Daniel, I suppose the best way is if we vote in favour of option A or option B.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
And we take people through that.
Sorry, Councillor Murphy's just put his hand up, Chairman.
So those in favour of A? Councillor Murphy, last minute.
Yes, sorry.
I wanted to make a point.
Yeah, just within the paper, I think I understand what it is, but it does cause people confusion. On one page, it refers to 12 p.m, 12 noon, 12 noon, 12 noon a.m. I think by 12 noon, we mean a.m, but I think by referring to, on 4.6, it talks about 12 p.m, no later than 12 p.m. on the day of the meeting. I don't think that means midnight. And just, if we could be a bit more careful in making sure the documentation uses the same interpretation of what the time of day is, it would help. We've got 3 variations of noon here.
Thank
Yes,
you,
I
Councillor
apologise
Murphy, and
for these
point
members.
taken.
Yeah, that's 12 noon, 12 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah. So option A is to retain the current motion deadline date. And can I have all votes in favour of that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just do the roll call. So, Councillor Allen,
Happy with A.
thank you. Councillor Bashir,
I'm happy with A2.
thank you. Councillor Iqbal,
B.
thank you. Councillor Murphy,
I'll go for B as well.
thank you. Councillor Sanford,
I'll go for option B as well, please. Thank you.
Councillor Shahid,
Option B, please, Dan.
Was minded to abstain.
Councillor Seaton.
A. Option A.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to confirm the results, that there were 4 in favour of option B and only 3 in favour of option A. Therefore, option B is the preferred timeline and the one that has been accepted by the committee.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. So I think that's the end of item 6. Unless you want to correct me. So item 7 is an amendment to the member officer protocol. And can I ask Fiona Macmillan to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 amendments being suggested to the committee tonight. The first is about motions that are being submitted to full council. So if you go to paragraph 4.1, and this was following discussions between officers and members at group leaders, that members would be expected to liaise with the relevant services areas with a view to submitting their motion in a form that's most acceptable before they submit that motion to Democratic Services. Basically so that the motion is as informed as possible to sort of cut down on the time taken once that motion is submitted and going to and fro between officers to make sure that it's legally correct and so on. So do you want to talk about that first before I move on to the next one?
I think that's reasonable. Thank you. Any hands? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. So just looking at this point in particular, I do recall us talking at group leaders meetings about you know, the timeline for submission of motions. I don't remember us actually agreeing this, and I do have some concerns about it. It's not that I think it's a bad thing that, you know, I think it's if a council in putting a motion forward wants to consult with sort of officers in that particular area, you know, to get their opinions and to get factual information to include in the motion, I think that's probably a good thing. I know, for example, that the Green Party is putting a motion to the forthcoming full council about cycling, and I know that, you know, they've been in contact with officers in that particular team to get some information for that. But I don't think we should put this as a requirement in the Constitution, because one of the reasons I don't think that is that sometimes, you know, motions are wanting to support what a council department is actually doing, but it's perfectly possible, and it happens in a number of occasions, that a motion might be critical of some particular aspect of the service that a council department is providing. So I don't think in those circumstances that the council department should be given any sort of ability to block a motion actually going in. And it could be in those circumstances that the councillor might decide that it's not appropriate that the department should be consulted. Now, I think the other thing to bear in mind is in our existing procedures, we already have a process whereby once a motion has been received, it goes to the legal officers. They check on it for legal compliance. I understand the process is also that it actually goes to the service department so they can check, whether it's legally possible for it to be implemented. So I think that process is already happening. If you put this in the Constitution, what you're effectively doing is requiring that process to happen twice, which I don't think. So I think it's a further example of something that it might be useful to encourage this to happen in certain circumstances, but it's not something I don't think that we should be putting in the council constitution.
Chair, if I might. Fiona, so
yes. Sorry. You go ahead, Chair.
Yes, I just wanted to come back to you, Fiona. So we're doing things twice. Would you like to respond to that?
I'm quite happy to change the word expected to encouraged. It's not about making a rule in this. It was just about asking members to consider doing that, to give a more, more inviting chance that when a motion's coming in that quite small window, when senior officers have got a lot of other things, other demands on their time, that when Democratic Services send it off to say trading standards for comment on something, and there's a short window for turnaround on that, and especially in the current times, it's about making sure that they're given as much time as possible to actually contribute something valid back to the wording of that motion. But again, it's not about requiring members to do something, and the word encourage would be absolutely fine too.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I think encourage is the appropriate word, and I would encourage all councillors to get drafts of their motions in or discuss the ideas with the appropriate officer. Actually, with an officer, to find out who the appropriate officer might be to deal with open spaces and fireworks or whatever it is. But I don't necessarily share Councillor Sanford's concern that by putting these wordings in, it would block people being critical, but it could lead to some arguments that we don't need. So I think we should just encourage. Protocols do actually form part of the Constitution in effect. So I don't think we actually need to change the protocol actually in this case. So I don't think we need to agree this recommendation here. And I think there may be some internal issues here. And I note from the reports that the Secretariat have been doing sterling work in providing workshop for officers so they know about the motions process. And I think at times they may be frustrated because how long does it take to get an appropriate service department to identify somebody to come back? And I note the word in it says from officer, that should be officers. So I'm just wondering whether this is an internal issue about good practice and encouraging people rather than necessarily a need to rewrite our protocols and by doing so our constitution.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I've got Councillor Allen next.
Thank you, Chair. And I like the word encourage. It's the way to go. I think help should be there when it's required, but we don't need a straitjacket or a prerequisite. So I think encourage is a perfect amendment to those words.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, I think in the interest of getting something that we can agree on, I'd probably, if it was up to me, I'd prefer something like encourage where appropriate. But I think encourage is fine. What I want to avoid is a situation where I submit a motion and then somebody in Democratic Services comes back to me and say we can't accept this motion because you've not consulted X person. So I think being encouraged to actually do it is okay, I think.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanford. I've got no further speakers, so if I may, I'm going to propose I'm going to recommend 4.1 and 3.8 motions submitted to full council with an amendment that in the first line it says are encouraged to liaise with the relevant service area. So can we take a vote on that, Daniel?
Yes, Chairman. So the recommendation is, as proposed by the Chairman, to change the word from expected to encourage. So it goes to Councillor Allen.
I'm for that amended arrangement, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Bashir.
I'm for that too.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
I agree too.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Yes, I'm for as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shahid.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Seaton.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
So we move on to the, okay, that's great. Thank you. You move on to the second item, Fiona, the use of council.
Thank you, Chair.
premises.
Use of council premises. Now, this amendment has come about because I had a complaint last autumn, remembering that this report was on the agenda for the March meeting, about what activities could be undertaken in council premises. And having looked into it, it didn't appear to be that there was any clear guidance for members on this, although clearly the Nolan principles in the Code of Conduct talk about use of resources and not using them for political purposes, including party political purposes, and also having regard to the Local Authority Code of Publicity. So that was in the Code of Conduct, but there wasn't any sort of specific guidance which set out exactly what sort of things that might include. So that was the aim behind this proposed amendment, was to make sure that members were clear about that line and what might fall on either side of it. Now, we had a discussion at group leaders this afternoon on this particular amendment as well, and I've had a email exchange with Councillor Sanford since then. He was concerned about 4.4F, the one that says allowances and expenses paid by the council to councillors in their official capacity, that by the inclusion of the word allowances, that might be the council trying to say that we could dictate how councillors' allowances could be spent. And that was certainly not the intention behind the inclusion of that word. It was about intending to cover those councillors that might be given a special responsibility allowance because they hold a particular role, for example, the mayor, where he can be paid an allowance in order to meet his reasonable expenses incurred during his term of office. That's known as a civic dignitaries allowance. It wasn't intended to cover usual member allowances, and of course there is no restriction on how councillors choose to spend these. But I'm happy to remove the words allowances and from that suggestion and make it start as expenses following that exchange. And then on H, where it says data and information in any form, electronic, paper, etc., provided by the council. I wanted just to make clear that to add in the words apart from publicly available information such as council agendas and minutes. So clearly, if a political group wishes to extract something from a council report for use in political literature, that's okay, because it's publicly available information. It's not using council resources as such. So that's really my introduction to it. So obviously over for comments and questions, please.
Thank you. Could I just ask one question there, Jonah, about H, data and information about elections might be provided by the council? Would that be covered?
Is that in a publicly available information about elections? Because most election information is publicly available.
I was just thinking about the voter registers that we
Rachel,
get.
would you want to come in on that one, please, as the elections guru?
Right, can get off mute there. So in relation to the registers, that would form part of that. That's okay, Councillor Seaton.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Sanford, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I'm grateful to Fiona for taking out those items. I do have a concern as to how they got in there in the first place, because I do think we have to be really careful that what we put into the council constitution, you know, needs to be, the wording needs to be really watertight, because it could be that the people looking at the constitution and interpreting it at the moment are behaving in a really reasonable way, but you know, people in future could come along who, you know, take a literal interpretation. Now, I actually take issue with what Fiona said, to the point that there is no, she said there isn't anything in the constitution on this at the moment. If you refer to paragraph 14 of the member officer protocol, it basically repeats a similar wording to what appears in the Nolan principles, that councillors must not use council for, I think the wording is facilities or resources for party political purposes. So, you know, I think I think all we need in the member officer protocol, you know, maybe that wording needs to be improved to make it a bit clearer, but I think that some sort of statement of that principle needs to be in there, and it's then up to officers to try and to where complaints are received to interpret that. I think where this resolution falls down is it tries to define precisely every single circumstance where, you know, some particular thing that the council provides could possibly be used for political purposes. Whereas what I would hope would happen, you know, when the monitoring officer, say, receives a complaint, she would have a look to see, you know, is this a substantial sort of abuse where, you know, somebody is clearly trying to claim an unfair advantage. And I would quote an example, you know, if I was a parliamentary candidate and I were to, you know, get myself photographed in the town hall, you know, with a council officer, and were to publish that in my election leaflet, and because there is a clear implication that the council and the council officer might be supporting that particular political party. Or for instance, if I were to do something like, you know, hanging a Liberal Democrat flag out of the window of the town hall so that people could see it, and there would be a clear implication there that, you know, that I was implying that the council supported the policies that the Liberal Democrats were putting forward. But, you know, there's already been argument over H, you know, about data and information in any form, electronic, paper, etc., provided by the council, you know, that must not be used for any so-called party political purposes. Well, you know, what about correspondence that councillors have? What about emails? Now, you know, we're all aware that some information that we receive is confidential, but, you know, some information is made available to us so that we can pass it on, you know, to constituents. So I think, you know, there's a thing that comes up a bit later on in here. You know, members should not display in or on council premises any material which is of a party political nature. Well, I think again, I would argue, you know, if I put up on the wall of our group room a Liberal Democrat focus leaflet in such a position that only members of the Liberal Democrat group can actually see that, you know, I don't see how that particularly causes any harm. Whereas, as I say, if I were to hang a flag out the window, you know, that is clearly me trying to you know, make an implication about the council. So I do think, you know, the whole issue of members allowances, that shouldn't really have been in there. So I just think we should remove all of this and just have a clear principle in there that, you know, that council resources should not be used for party political purposes.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I don't think there's any risk of anyone thinking we support Liberal Democrat policies. But I would have thought having a picture taken with a Conservative elected person in the town hall, well, let's go on to Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. There's quite a list of things here that are painfully obvious that shouldn't happen, but I am concerned maybe about C and H, some clarification on those, because with electronic media now, the use of logos and specific typefaces and styles, house styles, it could be that a councillor would use those to issue a document, giving the impression that it's a council policy that's being put across, rather than simply the councillor's own policy, or indeed that of his party. And I do think we have to drill down on that to make sure that it doesn't happen. I think it has happened, and don't think it should happen again. And we need to make sure and put protections in place to make sure that anything that goes out is obviously perceived by the resident that it's a councillor point of view on behalf of himself or his party, rather than a statement of the city council of which he happens to be a councillor. Hope I make myself clear on that.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Yes, whatever next, a councillor trying to claim something as their own. Fiona, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, if that's okay. I've got Councillor Murphy who wishes to speak first, and then I'd just like to come back to you on the point of this feels belt and braces, but Councillor Murphy first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, some good points. What Councillor Allen was saying, and Nick Sanford was saying, Councillor Sanford as well, are important. People may be aware of the days when you had council-headed notepaper and what you could and couldn't use that for. And it's not just political parties. We shouldn't be displaying things in windows of group rooms with a political position, be it on a referendum for Europe or whatever, and that's quite clear. I think the fact that this document has only just been discussed by group leaders, and it comes from March, very, very difficult to rewrite a protocol or write a protocol, and we haven't got the current rules before us tonight. So I think tonight to agree this would be premature. The author's intentions are great, but it does just raise problematic issues. Anything, for example, I'll just look at A. We could go on to look at others, but I'll just look at A because it's there. So it can include different sources, ICT equipment, including software and systems. Now, people may remember when they used a different PC for personal, for council, and for work purposes. Now it's all on the same phone. But really, the council email address, you shouldn't be using that to put together copy for your political newsletter or your political activity. You should be using your personal or your political address. But in practice, it's really confusing. And we just try to use one or two email addresses for members of the public to get in touch with us. And as councillors, we probably do receive things coming in through the Peterborough City Council software IT systems that are from political parties, are from politicians. Now, they've already mentioned the allowances and expenses as it appeared in here. It's £10,000. You know, as you read that, it could mean that you can't use that for any activity that's party political. Well, actually, a lot of political parties rely upon a percentage of councils' allowances. That's how it's developed since over the last 20 years since councils have got paid. So I think really at the moment to agree this document, even with the amendments that the officer suggested by taking out allowances and expenses, because it was only meant to mean the mayor or other special allowances, I think we really shouldn't agree at the moment. Though there is one thing, and it's the final paragraph in 4 about use of council facilities. It used to be that the council line was you can't use council buildings, i.e. the town hall or a committee room, for a party political activity. And sometimes that was interpreted as a political activity. But I think the suggestion here that you can use those premises if they are paid for is quite a good one. So I'd like that to be taken up elsewhere. And maybe the way forward on this would be training for elected members and the officers as well, so we know. But in most cases, people do adhere to the rules. They don't use the group rooms for overtly political purposes. If they do, they should be taken to task about it. So I think maybe we should defer this item this evening, and if it's needed, come back later on. But where people do breach things and it's common sense, put them straight. No, you don't invite a senior politician into the town hall to have their photograph taken and get officers in the background. Just if you have done it, don't do it again and understand why. But then again, you could take a photograph of a politician in the council chamber, and 2 years later, it could then be used as a political photograph, whereas the intention was just a social event. You see what I mean? Putting these things down right in here tonight does potentially bring up lots and lots of big issues, and certainly did for me when it looked at what we use our allowances for. So I think common sense should prevail, and we should just err on what we've got already, and where people breach that, guide them back onto the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I mean, I would have thought having a senior political figure, having their picture taken in the town hall, would be an excellent opportunity for Peterborough and to promote ourselves. But Fiona, I just wanted to come back to you, because I'm sensing at the moment that there's a bit of a view amongst the committee members that this is somewhat overkill.
And as that's the case, I'm quite happy to not push forward with it. It was on the back of a complaint from a member that it was not being, that the council resources were not being used properly, and it was felt that more detail would be helpful, but clearly that doesn't appear to be the case. I'm quite happy to leave it as it is.
Yes, was it from a councillor, or did I get the impression this was discussed at leaders?
Oh, it was from a councillor. It was nothing to do with leaders' meeting.
It was from a councillor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do I have a proposal there from yourself, Councillor Murphy, that this is held at the current time and brought back for review at a later date?
We can put it on the work programme again, if that's helpful. Yeah, 6 months.
But a date if required. I do like to make the point, though, the final paragraph, you may only use council-owned premises for party political purposes where such meetings are used to further political aims, objectives of the party concerned, if restricted to premises available for hire to members of the public generally and paid for at full hire cost. I think that's quite useful because previous monitoring officers used to say you can't use any council premises for political purposes. So if the Farmers Association wanted to hire it for a political activity, or a political party did, then we could do that, and the council could get the income as well. I think that one's quite good. I don't think we need to agree it tonight. It can be worked into working practices, I believe. So I am saying, yeah, defer this at the moment. Okay.
So I'm happy to second that we perhaps put it on the agenda for 2 meetings time. So not the next meeting, but the one after that, to revisit it.
If next time we're reviewing the protocol, maybe we can see whether there's still a view that it needs looking at.
That's fair enough. Councillor Allen, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, whilst we're kicking the can down the road, we need to know what's going to be in the can when it comes back, rather than just chew over the same old meal again. So I think we need better proposals, or something more succinct, if I may say.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's helpful to have belt and braces. Other times it just adds to the list of questions that members have. So I think in that case, I'm quite happy. Less is more, I think, probably.
I get that feeling. I think, Fiona, to be honest, there was a point made earlier, I think it was by Councillor Sanford, that a sort of general wording that you feel you could work within about council resources would be welcome.
Okay.
And I certainly, what I'm hearing is that the point from Councillor Murphy about paying full hire costs if you're going to use the town hall does seem a reasonable thing. But I'm going to put to members of the committee, proposed by Councillor Murphy, seconded by myself, that we review this issue again when the next review of the member officer protocol takes place. And Daniel, do you want to take a vote on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so first, Councillor Allen.
Consent.
Councillor Bashir.
Against.
Councillor Iqbal.
In favour.
Councillor Murphy.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Shahid.
Agreed. Thank you.
Councillor Seaton.
For.
Chairman, therefore that's agreed to defer.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Fiona, for introducing that item. And you now get to introduce the next one, I believe, the review of urgent decisions.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, I should say, not Chairman. It's really, Dan's put together a list of all the urgent decisions that have happened since our last meeting. Is that right, Dan? I think it's October,
Yeah,
since our last meeting. For you to see the decisions that have been made and the reasons that were given for those decisions. And really any comments, questions or actions. Thanks.
Thank you. So this was just providing information on urgent decisions that were made, I think because there was some concern about the number of urgent decisions being made. Councillor Murphy, you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the officers for putting together these decisions that have happened. Paragraph 4.2, there are occasions when the council may take urgent decisions, and the last sentence, without this procedure, there might be times when the council would have to pay financial penalties for not taking a decision. When you actually look through the decisions that have been cited, that doesn't come across. These decisions haven't been made urgently and without all the transparency, etc., because the council may end up paying financial penalties. I think there's only one there out of that lot. And I think we need to bear in mind what we had at a previous meeting when we asked how are other councils doing this. So how are other councils doing this? Some, well, many were not as often evoking these emergency procedures as we were. And also I think we need to know how's it going now compared to how it was going 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, accepting that things have changed. For example, we didn't have emergency traffic regulation orders 2 years ago, COVID-19. Now in Peterborough, they were published on a tweet on the Sunday. I don't think there was any process whatsoever. We're not so sure on that. The county councillors reviewed closing streets and things, etc. Not so sure what happened in Peterborough. So things have changed. My opinion is that the council does tend to evoke these more often than it should and without due consideration. And sometimes it has to be done because there's a timetabling problem, because we didn't manage to get published a public protection order, or we didn't manage to try, or we forgot, or a senior member of staff was not available or had moved or something. So I think some of this is a calendar issue with Peterborough City Council. What I decided to do was to look at the decisions before the period that we looked at as well, just to see. And the first one I came across with Northminster Car Park. It wasn't a decision to close the car park on health and safety grounds, but this council made a decision to demolish the car park and invoke all the emergency procedures, when in fact it could have got the reports together and put that decision through the normal process. And indeed, on occasions where we've used the emergency powers, one of the chairs of the committee did fess up that they were asked about it after it had already been made, so we haven't always got it right. I accept that mistakes are made.
I think we have to be careful making aspersions about committee chairs on here when they're not available to respond. Councillor.
Yeah, I was very careful not to name him or her, but I've got a record of it. But mistakes are made from time to time. And indeed, the cabinet member in that case didn't have to publish a cabinet member decision, but chose to do so to be the best possible transparency they could do. So it was good and bad. So I think really we need to have a look at this, what's gone on previously and what's gone on in the future. But I do think the council has used these procedures when it shouldn't have ought to. It's only a 3 or 4 calling period. If you can't do it on the Monday and you wait till the Friday, that really isn't a reason to use the emergency procedures. Thank you.
I take that point, Councillor Murphy, but I look at the list here and I get COVID-19 urgent and surge community swabbing service, extended support to businesses as a result of the COVID-19 coronavirus, you know, request to re-implement city centre public space protection. I think you could say 1 or 2 of these, not only extended business rate reliefs and support to businesses as a result of COVID-19. So approval of contract awards, adult social care providers was COVID linked. So there's only 9 on here, and I think there's 4 there that were emergency COVID items. So not only may they have financial implications, they could have life implications, life and death implications. Councillor Sanford, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you. I think I do share some of Councillor Murphy's concerns on this, and I think the key bit of information that isn't in this report is the criteria that are that is in the council constitution as to circumstances in which it is okay to exempt a decision from scrutiny. Now, I should have looked it up before the meeting, but I can recall going back a number of years, the phraseology in the constitution was that that you should only exempt something from scrutiny if the hold up due to the scrutiny process, if going through that process would seriously prejudice the interests of the council. Now, I think when I did look at what the current criteria says, it's a much looser term. It talks about, you know, where the council considers a decision to be urgent. But so I think what I would hope we could do, and I think maybe we perhaps need a report to a subsequent meeting, because I think I would like to see that criteria, that threshold, set really high, so that you don't exempt decisions from scrutiny only in the most exceptional circumstances. And just, I think, you know, Councillor Seaton is quite right in the sense that, you know, there are a couple of decisions on here that are to do with COVID, and there could well have been circumstances where they were actually urgent. But just to quote another couple of examples, you know, if you look at the award of the electricity contracts. Now, the council decided by agreeing to the climate action plan, which was agreed at the beginning of March 2020, the council agreed that we were going to switch to a renewable tariff. So what it says in the report is this was urgent because that decision had to be made by the 31st of August. Well, the 4th of March to the 31st of August, that's like a 5-month period. Now, okay, the council was in a crisis situation during that period due to the COVID situation. But, to say that having taken 5 months to make the decision, that taking another 5 days is going to prejudice the interests of the council, I think that's an unreasonable argument. And if you look down, the one about 3-bedroom houses in Paston Lane, again, it's not intuitively obvious why that was urgent. But the one that really stands out is increasing the streetlight dimming during the COVID-19 restrictions. Now, when I actually queried this at the time, when this decision actually went through, I was told that the reason it was urgent was the fact that by making the decision 5 days earlier, it would have meant that we'd have saved 5 days electricity supply. Now, I don't think that is a reason for exempting a decision from the scrutiny process. So I think what I would like us to do at this meeting is, if we could ask for a further report at the next meeting, when we can have a look at what the threshold is, what the criteria in the Constitution is, and maybe look to have a more robust criteria, because I do think there has been a significant increase in the number of times this power is being exercised, and I think it should only happen in really exceptional circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I mean, I would never argue that there are indeed occasions when urgency procedures are used because things have not happened the way they should do. And quite often that is with contract renewals. When I looked at this list, there were 1 or 2 that I would question. Why did we have to do the street light dimming? Well, actually, we've got no traffic on the roads. Let's get it done. Was that the view? But I can see a lot on there where actually I could understand why that decision was had to be made urgently. Now, I've got no other speakers. So, Councillor Sanford, you had a recommendation there. Did you want to state your recommendation again? I'm happy to take a vote on that.
Yeah, I think my recommendation is that, because we don't have the full information here, that if we could have a report at the next meeting that sets out the criteria in the Constitution for defining when this exemption from scrutiny can happen. And I think, as I say, my recollection is that going back a number of years, the criteria used to be much more strict, and I've got this recollection it was wording about the not seriously prejudicing the interests of the council. But so I think, could we have a report on that so we can have a discussion on it at the next meeting?
Who would you see, Councillor Sanford, producing that criteria? Is that something you would want to produce and submit to legal services?
I'd be happy to be involved in some discussion process on it. Yeah.
Fiona.
Chair, it's set out in the executive procedure rules at the moment. So I think what Councillor Sanford was wanting to review the sections in the executive procedure rules, which is sections 6 and 7 on urgency and special urgency, bring that back to the committee with a report, setting those current criteria out, and then you can consider whether you want to make any amendments.
Yeah, I would be happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Councillor Sanford. I heard that. We don't actually have a lot on the agenda for the next meeting, so that would be a good time to discuss it further. So Councillor Sanford is proposing that this particular section of the Constitution is brought back to this committee for discussion at the next meeting. I'm happy to second that. Daniel, shall we? Actually, it might be easier to just say, is anyone against that? on the committee? I'm
See
not
no
seeing
objection,
anyone.
yeah.
Okay,
That's fine
let's
for me.
move on. All approved. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. My next item is the Independent Remuneration Panel. And I've got Pippa Turvey to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so before members tonight is a report on the Independent Remuneration Panel. So the panel is due to meet the end of this year. It's been 4 years since it last met, so it's due to meet now and review the members' allowance scheme. Before we ask the panel to meet and propose its recommendations to council, we have proposed some amendments to the terms of reference of the panel for consideration by committee tonight. Mainly they are just updates to refresh the terms of reference after a long period, update them for current use, as it's been a good few years since they have been reviewed. And that includes the panel terms of reference itself, in line with current guidance, and also just a change to the Constitution and Ethics Committee subcommittee terms of reference. That's the hearings panel, to include any issues around the IRP in the hearings panel debate. And the main thing for members to consider this evening is also the change to the terms of reference to possibly allow for future joint working with Cambridgeshire. So there wouldn't be joint recommendations, but that would allow Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to use the same panel, just to be a bit more efficient that way. So you wouldn't have to do double recruitment and that kind of thing. So that's the main issues for members.
Thank you, Pippa. I think it is a challenge to recruit to the independent review panel, isn't it? So having one across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire might be a positive step. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, we did have a discussion on this at the group leaders meeting, and I think one comment that we made there was that of the people who'd applied, there wasn't anybody in the Peterborough area, but I think we were happy that, you know, that sort of officers had tried to attract a wide range of applicants, and that wasn't necessarily a problem. The only slight query I just want to raise is on page 2 of the terms of reference of the members' allowances panel. It says that the panel shall be comprised of 3 members of the public. Now, I understand what we were told at the group leaders meeting was that there were 4 applicants who'd applied and who were considered to be of a reasonable quality. So I think my recollection is what we recommended was that I think it's an appointment that the chief executive makes, but I think what we said was, you know, couldn't we have 4, so that if there's 4, it means that if one person can't turn up, you've at least got 3 of them. So I'm just wondering if we're prescribing that it has to be 3, would that rule out that as a possibility?
Chair, if I could just come in at that stage.
Yes,
can we change that to at least 3? Councillor Stanford's quite right. We have appointed 4, and I think at least 3 would cover that.
Thank you. I was about to propose exactly that. Beat me to it. Okay. I've got no other speakers, so I'm going to move on to a vote on agreement to this particular item. So the terms of reference, the independent review panel, and the changes to terms of reference, Constitution and Ethics Committee, with one proviso, which is under B, panel membership and appointment. The IRP shall be comprised of at least 3 members of the public. Is anyone against that? That's great. In moving things on, that's accepted, Daniel. Appreciate it. So item 10, dispensations. Fiona, over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the committee to note, as in your terms of reference, that when I issue a dispensation, it's reported to the committee. And since the last committee meeting, I've issued 2 dispensations and the details are set out in the agenda.
Okay, any comments from members? Okay, so we note the dispensations issued. Thank you very much, Fiona. Update on national issues, item 11. Fiona again.
Thank you, Chair. Right, well, this was originally due to come to your meeting in March, when we had been told just before that there was a consultation that was just about to be opened on a revised code of conduct. But because of COVID, that's all got pushed off, and so the consultation ran July, August time, and that link was sent round to all councillors to be able to take part in the consultation on potential changes to sort of a nationally issued code of conduct, which would be for councils to decide whether to adopt or not. So I hope that lots of members decided to take part in that consultation. It was also open to all officers and distributed to them as well. And so what's happened is that the LGA, the Committee on Standards in Public Life, asked the LGA to run this consultation on potential to a new code of conduct following their report, which was quite a while ago now, nearly 2 years ago now, Committee on Standards in Public Life report. So the LGA have run this exercise now, and they're putting together the consultation responses, and then they're expecting to issue those in the autumn, whenever that means. I'm not entirely clear what that means, but it hasn't been issued yet, but we're expecting it sometime in the near future. So when that happens, it'll obviously need to come back to the committee to have a look at, to decide whether or not that's what we want to put in place for Peterborough instead of our current code of conduct, or whether we want to take parts of it or to not take any of it. As far as I know, it'll be a voluntary matter. So that's the update on that. And then we've recently received in 4.7 of the report, there was a letter sent to all chief executives from the Committee on Standards in Public Life in July, asking for chief executives to consider whether or not we'd adopted the best past practice recommendations that the local government ethical standards report made. And then I've had a letter in the last week or so asking for councils to put together a response to that in terms of whether or not we're complying with those best practice recommendations. So I've just started to do some work on that. In the most we have, I think, and we're already doing it before the recommendations, which is good. And that's it really in terms of the update. Really, any questions, please?
Thank you, Fiona. I completed the consultation, recommended lengthy jail terms for anyone who breaks the code of conduct, as you'd expect. One issue I have, and I think you've now answered it, was you said we're waiting on the LGA code of conduct. Mm. And then the Committee on Standards in Public Life, you said, has written to us and asked for a progress update on implementation.
Yes.
They understand that progress update is only what we're currently doing?
Well, the Committee on Standards on Public Life made a lot of recommendations. You will remember we had the full report at this committee to look at, and we did a table looking at what we do currently against what they're recommending, and a number of recommendations needed legislative change for that, and including different sanctions that needs legislative change for that to happen. But alongside those recommendations, they also did a list of best practice recommendations, which are on page 64 and 65 of your agendas. And that was really their recommendations. It's not, they can't enforce it in any way, but what they're saying is that councils that want to have good, high ethical standards should be doing this. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I think there was a list of 15 items, wasn't there?
Yes.
So that's what we're that's what we're going back to them on in terms of progress on implementation,
Yes.
those 15 items. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Sanford, you had your hand up. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, I was actually changed my mind, but I'll just mention the point. I was just looking at paragraph 4.6 in the report, and it says the LGA is going to bring a revised model code to its conference in the autumn. Well, the conference hasn't happened. It was due to happen in July, but it's been postponed. So, yeah.
Do you know when it's been postponed to,
was
Councillor Sanford?
Well, I think the 2020 one's been cancelled. It's gonna, so the next one will be in July 2021.
Okay.
What they're actually doing is
my
they're doing like a
confusion,
series of
Councillor
online.
Sanford, was that.
So sorry.
So I was just saying that was my concern, Councillor Sanford, that they said we're waiting on the LGA, but then the Committee on Standards in Public Life are expecting us to do things. Well, the LGA, I suspect we're not going to hear. Might be autumn, might be next year.
It might be, yes.
Okay, well, I think this was just for noting and no particular issues, actions that we need to take on it. So thank you. I'll move on. Item 12, Code of Conduct report. Fiona.
Yes, thank you, me again, Chair. Just again for noting that the complaints that have been received have been handled by either myself or Amy as Deputy Monitoring Officer since our last meeting last September. So there's quite a lot of them because it's been there's that passage of time. Obviously, this committee's procedures are that we deal with these matters on a confidential basis. Unless there's any kind of a breach finding at the end of the process, in which case they're made public. So it's not really for discussion, but for noting.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on. Item 13, Work Programme 2020-21. Dan, you're going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Members' Work Programme for the committee. We'll add on the two items that you mentioned, so to look at the review of the urgency procedures and the wording that the Constitution has, and then also the deferred item on the Member Office Protocol. And then this is just an opportunity for members to suggest any further items to the work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. I've got no hands up. So recommendations to note future items plus any items mentioned at tonight's meeting.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to put my hand up on my phone, but could I say something, please? It's just on the next meeting is due to be on the 23rd of November now. The two items that I imagined would take up most of that agenda would have been the new National Code of Conduct, which we were expecting to have it in front of us by then, and then also to review the social media code for members. Now, the new Code of Conduct is expected to have a significant section on social media, so there doesn't seem to be much point in reviewing it separately. So what I was going to suggest is that that's put in as a provisional meeting at this stage, and that if that hasn't occurred, we might want to deal with it all at the February meeting instead.
I think that's very reasonable, Fiona. Sorry, Councillor Sanford, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, it's just that what the officer was saying was about we've deferred the item on the member officer protocol. My recollection of what we agreed was we said that that issue would be considered when the member officer protocol again came up for review. So I didn't think we were saying it was going to be looked at the next meeting. That's not what I recalled.
Sorry, I was talking about the update on national issues, which was the review of the Code of Conduct that the LGA are doing. That's what I was referring to, not the member officer protocol. And because social media policy is also on the forward plan here, those were going to be taken as a whole. So it might be a good idea to have the meeting in as a provisional date, and then when we get that, we can have a longer meeting to look at that properly.
Yeah, what I was meaning was when before you spoke, I think it was
Yeah.
Daniel said that we deferred the member officer protocols to the next meeting, but that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, with the
Yeah.
time, not the next meeting, but when it
Okay.
comes on.
When it next come up, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, we have a sort of informal way of determining what goes on the agenda for these meetings, which is fine because it's not like other scrutiny committees, because they are scrutiny committees, and there's a terms of reference to how that comes on. Now we've got work to come back on the urgency and have a look at what our criteria are, and I think some of us have the view that needs to be toughened up, but other things are pending. What's happening nationally with events that may not be happening in October or not. So I think we're going to have to leave it. I do ask the question about how do we determine what goes on the agenda, and maybe we need to look at that. Presumably it's between the officers and the chair, I don't know, or do you speak to opposition reps? We've got that one thing coming back. There is one issue though, I think, and it is the confidence in our code of conduct. I won't go into breaching any names or anything here, because we've had things looked at over a year, investigations completed in February, and I know a lot of this depends upon what happens nationally with code of conducts, what councils do and what can't they do. We've had incidents of people who complained they've been blocked on Facebook or something. Some of it is trivial, but some of it may be serious, and I'm just wondering whether we need to look at what confidence there is in our own code of conduct, because is there any point in having one if it takes a year for an outcome? So back to it. It doesn't
take that point,
like
Councillor Murphy. You know, we've got people who've agreed to apologise who've never given an apology. We had a hearing where, you know, we went all the way to full council and nothing ever happened. I think two things here. We're on the work programme, so we need to sort that out first. And you asked the question, how do we determine items on the agenda? Under item 13, work programme 2020-21, we determine items on the agenda. We do that as a committee. So if you have items that you want to add to the work programme, absolutely let Daniel know. I don't think I've ever failed to accept something onto the agenda. So please do that. And your second point about the effectiveness of the existing code of conduct, again, if you want to put that on the agenda, I have no problem. What Fiona has said is that there is a November meeting in the diary. So we leave that as a provisional meeting to see if it's worthwhile based on the LGA code of conduct feedback and some of the other issues that are outstanding. If not, we will probably move it into early in the new year. Is that reasonable? Is there anything, so if you want to put something on the agenda, either tell me now or let Daniel know and he will go through that with me.
If that's an invitation,
Okay.
Chair, then it's the effectiveness of our code of conduct and members' behaviour as an item, and also clarification on the exemption rules and transparency with a view to tighten it up. Too many decisions are made under the exceptions as an item as well for November or whenever is appropriate. I think putting it into the new year, though,
we have already accepted that. I think we've already accepted that on the next agenda will be a review of the urgency procedures. Thank you. That is already on the next agenda. In terms of the a review of the effectiveness of the code of conduct, I'm happy to put that on the next agenda.
Thank you.
Chairman, my only comment is that that's obviously all tied up and whether our current code is fit for purpose and the revision to the code from the LGA. They're kind of quite linked, aren't they? So again, might be best to put it as part of that report when it comes. We could survey members and
absolutely,
ask for their
be...
views. Maybe.
Oh, totally, Fiona. I accept that we may be reviewing something that 2 or 3 months later disappears out the window. And it's a nonsense. But my colleague Councillor Murphy's asked that we put it on the agenda, and we can then discuss exactly how we cover off how we assess the effectiveness. And it may be that there is a look back there, and there is also a look forward towards the new code. But you also raised the point, and I think it was within my remit. So the November meeting is provisional. We will review that when we get to November, and we may push it back into the new year if we don't have a response to the items we're expecting. Okay. Councillor Murphy, did you want to come back on that? You've still got your hand raised, or is that a legacy hand?
No, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy.
Cool, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So, members, thank you. I think this now brings tonight's meeting to a close. My apologies, it's been quite a long one, but I think we've covered a lot of important issues. So thank you. Good night.
Merry Christmas.